So in order to start manipulating objects in our 3D scene and performing operations on them, we need to first select them. So in order to do that, we need to have our select tool selected. You can also use any of these transform tools, and there's ability to select something. So I can have the move tool and I can click on something and I can select it. But generally speaking, sometimes it's safer to just use the select tool itself. So I'll use the select tool, and in order to select something, I just have to left click on it. And as soon as I do that, you'll notice that it has a green highlight on that object. If I want to select more than one object, because you'll see as soon as I click on a new thing, it goes ahead and deselects the previous object to give me a new active object. I can hold shift and left click on another thing. And so now I have a group of objects with the latest one that I've selected green and the ones that are also active white. So I can just go across and keep selecting new things with holding shift and left clicking on it and dragging it up or moving around, doing whatever I want to. I can also select multiple objects with a marquee select. So a marquee select is this. When you click and drag on an empty space, you'll notice you drag out, you can drag on top of a model too, it doesn't have to be on an empty space. But you'll notice everything that's within that box is selected. Even if I just grab just like a part of it or a little inch of that object, it selects it too. So this is going to be really handy for selecting multiple objects at once instead of having to click on each one of them. If I want to remove something from my selection, I can hold shift and left click on it again, or shift and drag over it again to remove it. So shift will add, but shift can also remove. So it's like toggling the selection of that object. If I just want to remove things and I don't want to also add things, I can hold control. So I can just hold control. I'm going to select all these things. And you'll see it deselects everything. And you'll see the cursor becomes a minus next to my little mouse cursor, little minus icon. If I do shift, let's say I had these objects right here selected and I hold shift and go across, you'll see they get unselected and these objects are now selected. So remember that shift is going to be a toggle, so it's going to toggle selection on or selection off, and control is always going to be off. So one thing you might notice if you use the marquee select, this drag select to select multiple objects, is that you'll try to select something on one side. So let's say I want to select this window, and you'll inadvertently select other objects that are on the other side of the mesh that you can't currently see. And that's because when I drag out this little square, it's essentially going through my entire scene from my camera and pointing straight through. And anything that might be in that square through my scene is going to be selected as well. It's like as if I turned on wireframe or turned on my X-ray mode and clicked on it, everything that I could see through X-ray is going to be selected, including that tree and a bunch of these walls. So you can toggle that off if you don't like it for some reason. And so what you can do is you can come to the tool settings for your the select tool. So double click on the select tool to open the tool settings. And underneath here where it says marquee, you can turn that on to camera-based selection. And what that does is if I click and drag, if I can't see the object, it's not going to select it. So these objects are blocking my sight of this area over here. So no matter how much I click and drag over here, it's not going to select anything through there. So I use both. I frequently just leave camera-based selection turned off personally, and I just make sure that I go through and deselect the things I don't want to select, but it's really up to your personal preference. So once your scene starts to get really complicated like this one is, with a lot of assets, you'll usually want to start coming up to the select menu and performing slightly more advanced selection operations. So we're just going to look at the first top ones up here. So we can select all by type. So if I just want to select these cameras, I can come here and do select all by type camera, or I could do select all by type polygon geometry. So it's going to select only the geometry. And so if you have a really complex scene and let's say you want to hide or delete all the lights in the scene, that can be really handy for grabbing those, because if you're just trying to hand select them, it's going to get a little tedious. And if you try to marquee select, you'll get all the stuff you don't want to select. If you have specific objects and not necessarily based on their type, like a camera, a light, or a piece of geometry, but a specific object, so let's say I wanted to hide or delete everything besides this camera, I can select that camera and go select inverse. What that's going to do is it's going to select everything else besides my camera, just like you would expect an inverse selection to happen. One other type of selection that I want to cover, which again is probably going to be a little bit more advanced if you're just starting out and you might not need it, but it's selecting by hierarchy. And the way that works, I'm going to go ahead and hide this treehouse and show, let's go ahead and I'm just going to delete those guys. I'm just going to go ahead and show this joint chain here. And so I have a joint chain. And so this joint is a 3D object, which is a parent of this joint, which is a parent of this joint. So that means that when I move this parent, it moves all of its children as well. And so if I look at my outliner, I can see that structure down here, right? So here's joint 1, joint 2, joint 3. Okay, you don't really have to worry about what joints are at this point necessarily. Just know that they are grouped underneath each other so that the one that's at the top level moves everything that's at a lower level. And so sometimes what I'll want to do is I'll want to actually manipulate everything in a hierarchy. This is what's called a hierarchy. These objects relating to each other and not being separate. You can see with those groups in this group right here with all the geometry that I was looking at. This is a hierarchy as well, right? So we have these groups that have all the geometry underneath it. So if I come over here, if I want to select each of these elements at the same time, it can be kind of hard because especially with joints, you'll see when I click and drag on this, it's actually only selecting the top of the hierarchy. It's not selecting the children, right? And there's various reasons why Maya wants to do this with certain types of objects like joints. That's not really important right now. But sometimes we want to select everything. And so we could come in here and just shift select, right? Because marquee select isn't working. Or we can select them inside the outliner. Another thing we can do is we can do what's called select by hierarchy. So let me go ahead and show you an example. I want to select all these joints. I open my channel box and I want to change the radius to be larger, right? So that they appear larger. So I'll come in here and type in 2. You'll see only the first one's changing. That's because I have that selected. So Control Z. So what I can do is, unless I want to hand select them, I can select the parent or the top level of the hierarchy. I can come over to select hierarchy. And what it's going to do is it's going to go through whatever you have selected, and anything that is parented or is a child of this object is also going to be selected. So I can come here, type in 2. And now you'll see all 3 of these guys, because all 3 of them are selected, are being modified at the same time. So once your scene gets really complicated or you're working on something like a character rig, select by hierarchy can be really helpful.